can talk about, the reason why you've joined the call. Before I mention, going to pass you over, just wanted to mention, obviously the challenges that we have as an organization is working closely with clients to find the best talent that's available in the marketplace, and that really understand their needs as an organization. And it's also the same with the candidates that we work with. It's just really making sure that we can find the right roles that help their career progression and really understand what's important to them in terms of their place to work as well. And one of the interesting but maybe not surprising facts that we've discovered around neurodiversity is that 50% of hiring managers are uncomfortable in hiring neurodivergent workers. And so this is an area that we wanted to explore as an organization. And we wanted, as we did that, it was a great opportunity to partner with Alexis and the team at Penna and open that up to our candidates, our clients, and the wider community, anyone else that wants to join the call. So before I pass you over, if you look at the bottom of your screen, there is an option for Q&A. So please do pass through any questions that you have, and we'll have plenty of time at the end to go through those questions. And if we don't get time to answer them in this session, we'll be able to follow up. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Alexis, who will carry on with the today's session.
Thank you, Andrew, and welcome everybody. It's fantastic to see so many of you here today. As Andrew's quite rightly said there, and as on screen, I'm Alexis Curtis-Harris. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at Penna. I'm so delighted to be here today, and as I said, to see so many of you here. And I have what we hope will be a really insightful session for you. Whenever I run these kind of sessions, I just want to also make it really clear that this is a safe space with no judgment. So the point being, ask questions. We're all on this journey around diversity, and in particular neurodiversity, including myself. So I'm completely open to any questions, either as we go, or hopefully we'll have some time at the end as well for a Q&A. I can't pretend I know everything, but I'm of course more than happy to share any expertise and personal experience as well that I can. Just also before we do start, I just really would encourage people afterwards to follow up with your own education as well and your own learning. We can never stop learning in this space, and things change all the time. So hopefully this will be the start of your own learning journey. So let's begin. So I guess to begin with the basics, what is neurodiversity? Kind of why we're here today. So neurodiversity is an umbrella term for a group of hidden disabilities. And I use the term hidden as often disabilities can be split between those we can see visually, for example, a physical disability, and those that we can't. But I think a point that's also worth saying is that not all neurodivergence isn't obvious, even though we call it sometimes a hidden disability. So essentially, neurodiversity is the term used to describe natural variations within our human brains, and it relates to those differences in the way that we might think, the way we process information, the way we learn, we take in information, and sometimes the way we behave as well. And actually, at last kind of review, 1 in 7 people have a neurodivergent condition. So you think about when you're sitting in your offices, whether you know it or not, the chances are that people around you, or even yourselves, might have a neurodivergent condition. And what that means is that people will have these unique traits. And this means that neurodivergent brains basically will work differently to what we call the cognitive norm. And the term cognitive norm, what I mean by that is that the brain kind of functions and processes in the way that society will expect it to. And the majority of people will fall into that category, and they are what we call neurotypical. And even those who might have neurodivergent conditions, what we've kind of seen is that individuals are actually more likely to identify with 2 or more neurodivergent conditions, and actually 17% actually identify with 3 or more. So that's why it's really important that we raise awareness, share learning, look at how we can support and encourage that power and difference in the workplace. Now, as the title of this whole session suggests, great minds don't think alike. And whilst people with neurodivergent conditions tend to find some things very hard or might find some things challenging. There are so many strengths as well that come with it. So one of the main things I want us to take away from this is the strengths, and you'll probably get that from the session that we go through. One other thing to note is that as I'll go through today's session, I will share some traits and behaviours and challenges and strengths, as I've mentioned, for various different conditions. But it's just really important to understand that no two conditions are ever the same or ever exactly the same. So this is what I'd call much more of a guide and an overview. And I think anything we can take away, the best way to understand an individual is to ask them. Now, of course, our aim is to work towards a society where all variations of human cognition are accepted and enabled. And obviously, that's why sessions like this, and that's why the focus on neurodiversity is so, so important. So I did just want to touch on the legislation. Now, I won't spend heaps of time. It's very huge, the subject, and we could probably do an entire whole session on legislation in itself. But for those who might not be aware, the Equality Act 2010 is an act that legally will protect people from discrimination in the workplace, but also within kind of wider society. It's basically been created to provide Britain with a discrimination law that will protect people from any kind of unfair treatment, and is basically there to promote a fair and more equal society. Now, the Act will cover many, many different what we call protected characteristics. So this could be age, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, race, religion, pregnancy and maternity, sex, sexual orientation. But for today, obviously, our focus on neurodiversity means I'm relating and referring to disability. So the Equality Act basically makes it, as I've said, illegal to discriminate against any kind of developmental condition, and states that companies are required to make reasonable adjustments in the workplace to level the playing field and promote neurodiversity as the standard. And I think just whilst we're on the topic of legislation, I think something that's really interesting, I find, is that we also have the Autism Act 2009. And at the moment, that remains the only law in England that's aimed at improving working conditions for people with one particular disability. So that in itself is just an acknowledgement that, for instance, those with autism still do face very specific challenges in being kind of both understood and supported. Now, one thing that you've probably already noticed so far is that I've kind of been using a bit of different terminology to describe different variations and varying terms around neurodiversity. And please know, I understand it can sometimes be a little confusing if we don't know, and we don't know what we haven't been told, or we don't know what we don't know. So that's why sessions like this are good. And hopefully just kind of going through this, and you will get a recording of the session as well. So you'll have all this, don't worry about having to scribble it down if you don't want to, but hopefully this will help break it down for you. So let's start with neurodiversity. Now, we've talked a bit already. This is the diversity or variation of cognitive functioning in humans. And it's the diversity of human minds, that infinite variation of neurocognitive functioning within society. So essentially, we use this term when we're talking about the diversity of cognitive functioning. So it's used in situations where you will have neurotypical and neurodivergent individuals, and that is the neurodiversity. Neurodiverse is the inclusion of a number of substantial cognitive functioning variations. And as I said at the start, it is more common that people who are neurodivergent may have 2 or 3 or more different conditions. Neurodivergent, which I think I've used a bit already today, is having that less typical cognitive variation, so such as autism, which I've mentioned already, ADHD, and neurodivergent. You also might sometimes see it kind of abbreviated with the letters ND. And I mentioned that because the first time I saw it, I had no idea what it was, but ND is neurodivergent. And it basically means that the individual has a mind that functions in the way that will diverge significantly from that dominant societal standard of norm. Neurodivergence is that presence of grouping of these less typical cognitive variations. And neurotypical is those that function in the way that society expects them to. So somebody who doesn't have a neurodivergent condition, it means having that style of neurocognitive functioning that falls within that dominant societal standard, essentially. So hopefully that helps break it down a bit in terms of terminology. I know it can be confusing. And as I said, you will get this, but hopefully that will help with understanding what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the session today. So now I just wanted to go through some different neurodivergent conditions in a bit more detail. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is an overview session, and individuals should always be treated as just that, individuals. But from an educational and knowledge sharing perspective, I've pulled together a bit of a summary and some kind of key stats that some more common challenges and some brilliant strengths that some of these different conditions will have and will kind of present themselves in. Now, for some people, the variation between challenges and strengths can be more pronounced, which can bring some amazing talent, but it can also be quite disabling in some cases. So we'll run through a number of these. As I said, though, just to reiterate it, always ask individuals, and no two people will actually be the same. But to start with, let's look at dyslexia. So dyslexia is probably one of the most common or widely heard of neurodivergence. It might be the most kind of understood, usually affecting somebody's ability to potentially read or write accurately. And as you can see on screen, kind of 1 in 10 people are likely to be dyslexic. There's around 700 million dyslexic people worldwide. But more importantly, and why these sessions are so important, despite 10% of the population being dyslexic, 22% are unemployed. So some of the things that can present themselves as, I guess, challenges for those who may have dyslexia can be memory, organization, as I said, that kind of reading and writing, and sometimes kind of time management as well. But as I said at the start, I really want to focus on the strengths and the strengths that this brings. And this will hopefully really help us when we get to latter parts of the session, when we're talking about how do we recruit and create this fair and equal recruitment process. So strengths with those with dyslexia could be, for instance, creativity. So we see sometimes that dyslexics can be very creative people, many different reasons, but often they may have been trying to find other ways to solve different problems in their lives or learn things differently to make things easier for themselves, which has given that capability to sometimes think outside the box. We often see really strong design skills and strength in kind of spatial awareness and pattern recognition, which can mean that those who have dyslexia can sometimes design things which others haven't even considered. And this can make kind of really groundbreaking innovators within these people. Communication as well. It's often kind of commonly thought that those who have dyslexia might be kind of poor communicators, but actually we see a lot of people who have communication as a strength. If you think though, communication can be many, many different ways. It's not just sitting and speaking to somebody. For those who have maybe lived throughout their lives with dyslexia, having to continue to explain how you live with dyslexia in a way that might be easier for others to grasp is a skill that requires good communication. And then just being able to sometimes see the bigger picture. Another strength there is seeing that big picture, because often people with dyslexia can make really great entrepreneurs and managers, because they're able to sometimes look past the detail and focus on that big picture and what really matters. And that can translate into some really key strengths, which I'm sure most people in the workplace would value. So dyspraxia, now this is a specific learning difference which affects coordination and movement, balance sometimes, and also sometimes organisation. And it can present itself in sometimes motor difficulties, like for instance, poor hand-eye coordination or spatial awareness, and can sometimes affect kind of daily tasks like even writing. Now, dyspraxia can often exhibit quite similar characteristics to some other neurodivergent conditions, particularly Asperger's or ADHD, as there are some similarities in challenges around memory and concentration and social interaction. And within the workplace, it's often found that those who have dyspraxia are extremely motivated and strategic thinkers, as they have sometimes had to persevere in the face of adversity their whole lives. And as you can see on the left there, research does suggest that 52% of young people with dyslexia actually may also have dyspraxia. Interestingly, males are twice as likely as other genders to be diagnosed. And 10% of people in the UK have mild to moderate dyspraxia. So challenges might be, as I've mentioned, hand-eye coordination, spatial awareness, organisation, short-term memory, sometimes even being able to express thoughts clearly. But the strengths, as I said, focusing on the strengths. So we often see leadership being a great strength. It's been shown that those with dyspraxia often have learned and developed really great soft skills because they've had a lot of active listening and empathy. Their desire for people to understand what they deal with ensures that they communicate often very clearly, which can make them really great leaders. Empathy as well, often people with dyspraxia have a great ability to understand and respect what others are thinking or feeling. Due to some of their kind of more common challenges that we mentioned, they're often very empathetic and can see the way through in tough situations. That strategic thinking as well, having experience of having to kind of navigate a mind which might be quite unorganized, they're often can be very intelligent people and able to create strategies to overcome certain problems in a very structured way. And then often we see problem solving being another great strength, often really great at being able to come up with different approaches to situations and to be able to see alternative routes sometimes, which of course is a huge strength. Now, autism, and I've touched on autism already, and as you remember at the start, we have the kind of Autism Act specifically for this neurodivergent condition. So autism is a spectrum condition which affects how people will interact and communicate, I guess, with the world around. It's often typecast as a neurological development disorder, which can be kind of characterized by repetitive patterns of behavior, and in some cases kind of some difficulties with social communication. It can sometimes manifest itself also with struggling to deal with change. But what I will say is, in particular with this condition, there is no one definition I could give you that could truly capture the range of characteristics that people on this spectrum may experience. So just to reiterate again, these are overviews and commonalities, but the spectrum is so wide. And many people with autism will find it challenging to understand the intricacies of verbal and non-verbal cues in some cases. So this can mean that they may often take words literally. So when we use idioms or expressions, that can seem kind of puzzling. Rhetorical questions or sarcasm, metaphors, irony, those kinds of things can sometimes, in some cases, be quite difficult to understand. So I always use the example of, you know, when you say, oh, I killed two birds with one stone, you kind of know what we're kind of saying there. We've done a lot of things at once, but actually a person with autism may interpret that very literally and think that two birds have actually been killed with a stone. Often linking to the social cues as well. There could be instances where, you know, that kind of not being able to maybe read the room, so might continue to talk at length without realizing that others aren't engaged or interested in kind of what they're saying. And in some cases as well, people with autism can have trouble in understanding their own feelings and emotions, and also recognizing and understanding these feelings in others. So, for example, again, in some cases, and I keep saying some because I really want to hammer home that point that there is so much difference in this one neurodivergent condition. But for example, if somebody's crying, they might not ask if they're okay, stand a little too close in a conversation or a little too far away. So as you can see these stats on the side, kind of 1 in 59 children are diagnosed with this particular neurodivergence. Again, males are 4 times as likely to be diagnosed than other genders. And actually in the UK, over 700,000 people are on the autistic spectrum. You might also have heard or hear, or when you do your own research afterwards, hear about kind of high functioning autism, which is an expression that describes cases where behavioral and communication elements are present, but this doesn't impact on intelligence. So, for example, Asperger's. Now, I will be touching on Asperger's in a bit more detail separately, but just to kind of bring that in as well, if you do hear about kind of high functioning autism. So challenges we've touched on. So this could be speech, articulation. Also, you sometimes see kind of sensitivity to light and sound. That lack of perception of others' emotional state, the way that information is processed, and sometimes kind of multitasking as well. But the strengths. So attention to detail. People on the autistic spectrum often have really great attention to detail and focus. It means that they're able to search through, for example, lots of information to be able to identify specific content. Efficiency is very often another strength as well, and those on the autistic spectrum are usually really brilliant at following rules and sequences and orders and patterns. And logical thinking as well, often very logical thinkers, as sometimes they can struggle to consider more emotional factors, but this can sometimes bring with it really great objective approaches to problem solving. And then knowledge retention as well. This can often be really great, in particular in topics that are of interest, and people can retain lots of information with really great detail. And that can often translate into visual memory as well. So ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, this is often characterized by an inattentiveness or an impulsivity, or in some cases kind of a hyperactivity. You might also have heard of ADD. Now that is essentially all the traits of ADHD, but without the H, the hyperactivity, essentially. And this learning difference can bring with it kind of unique advantages, of course, to the workplace in the form of kind of energy and motivation and new approaches. And as you can kind of see, the worldwide perception of adults with ADHD is estimated at 2.5%. Again, males are 3 times more likely to be diagnosed than other genders. And actually, around 55% of families where a child has ADHD, one parent will have the learning difference as well. So challenges can kind of manifest themselves with kind of time management, concentration sometimes, that's being able to stay on topic, rationality, or even articulation. But the strengths. So often we see a real hyper focus with people with ADHD. So when something is of interest, people with ADHD can be very focused and committed to, I don't know, a specific project or something, which can make them really, really efficient. Creativity is often very prevalent as well in those who may have ADHD. That imaginative and busy mind allows for original ideas and novel and creative solutions to problems. Enthusiastic people, despite kind of, I guess, some periods of low energy, people with ADHD can also have these bursts of enthusiasm and determination. And innovation, I think, as well, is a huge strength. Sometimes that fearless approach can exhibit kind of real bold and innovative ideas within those who have ADHD. And of course, the few that I've gone through are not the entire list of those, the neurodivergent conditions. There are many, many more, and I've pulled out a couple more here as well. So dyscalculia, it's a specific learning difference that's characterized by kind of impairments in learning arithmetic facts and processing numbers and performing kind of calculations. Dysgraphia is a learning difference that affects kind of written expression. So it can sometimes appear as kind of difficulties with spelling or poor handwriting, or being able to kind of get your thoughts out your brain and onto paper. Erlen syndrome is that kind of perceptual processing disorder. So it's a problem, or it can present itself as a challenge with the brain's ability to process visual information. Hyperlexia is this syndrome that's observed in people who have kind of a precocious self-taught ability to read words, and it often kind of happens early in life, so before the age of 5. Tourettes syndrome, you may have heard of this. It's an inherited neurological condition. Key features can be kind of tics, involuntary sounds or involuntary movements. And it is a complex condition, as many of these are. And a large amount of people who have this condition might actually also experience some other challenges with like anxiety and things like that. Obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, a very common mental health condition where a person might have what's deemed as obsessive thoughts or compulsive behaviors. Synesthesia is a condition that it's where simultaneously perceived by additional senses such as sight. So another form of synesthesia can be kind of letters, shapes, numbers, having challenges with that kind of sensory perception such as smell, color, flavor, and anxiety. Now, there's a number of different kind of mental health conditions that all fall under neurodivergent. Anxiety in particular is one, social anxiety in particular, bipolar disorder can also be another, borderline personality disorder. So I won't spend more time on these kind of different types, because as I said, I'd really love if people go away and want to do their own research, but hopefully that's given you a bit of insight into some of the different conditions that fall under the neurodivergent umbrella, and will kind of spark your interest in looking at how you can continue to learn and focus on the strengths, but also look at how you can support with potential challenges as well. So neurodiversity in the workplace, and I guess the reason why many of you may have joined today is to see how we can improve neurodiversity in the workplace and raise awareness and raise acceptance of those with neurodivergent conditions. And Andrew kind of covered a couple of stats at the start as well around those with neurodivergent conditions and challenges in the workplace. And I do often find it quite, what's the word? Heartbreaking, I guess is the word, but just interesting to hear still how much difference and challenge there can be with workplaces accepting neurodiversity. So, for instance, only 16% of autistic adults are in full-time employment in the UK. The highest level of bias is against employees with Tourettes and ADHD, and actually 1 in 3 businesses who were surveyed, this was a couple of years ago, said they would be uncomfortable employing somebody with either Tourettes or ADHD. And a recent survey found that 73% of those with a neurodivergent condition didn't disclose their condition during a recruitment process because they feared they'd be discriminated against, which I find shocking, 73%, which is why it's so important that we do everything we can to make sure that we are as aware of different conditions and how to ask people about the support they need, but also that we're promoting externally how inclusive our workplaces are, so that we don't give people fear of disclosing a condition when actually by disclosing we could offer additional support to level the playing field. So building a neurodiverse environment. So how do we effectively do this? Well, I'll go through a few things that I think can be really supportive and that can help to encourage a much more inclusive workplace and an environment where neurodiversity can thrive and excel. Now, this, of course, isn't everything, but I wanted to kind of go through a few points. So I think for a long time, potential hires and candidates were rejected in the past for poor culture fit. Now, if anybody on this call has joined any sessions I've run before, I harp on about this all the time. I'm on a mission to ban the F word, and not the F word you might be thinking in your mind. I'm talking about fit. We shouldn't be focusing on fit. I can't stress it enough. We should be focusing on culture add. Focusing on that fit can create what we call like unhealthy monocultures and can be damaging to individuals and actually can either stop them from wanting to apply to a job or cause them to leave once they start. But going back to the workplace and building out a kind of a strong, I guess, neurodiversity program, we should be pushing this message out externally and internally, making it part of BAU employment in general. So firstly, it could be providing really clear expectations and being really explicit about the expectations of a role, making job descriptions really clear, conducting inclusion reviews across them, explaining what might feel like normal, etiquette and unwritten rules of a workplace, and clarifying the adaptations that can be made in a work environment to help staff and employees integrate and thrive. In your interview and assessment processes, where you can, focus on skills-based hiring. A lot of employers will ask candidates for a broad level of competence in areas such as communication skills, emotional intelligence, persuasiveness, but by conforming to the standard of those, you can effectively screen out neurodivergent talent. I've seen it as well before about kind of sharing a sample of interview questions in advance as well, accommodating these different needs and, of course, reasonable adjustments. And one thing I will say about reasonable adjustments is, as you've probably gathered from this session, no two people are the same. So always ask the individuals what they need, how you can support them. For instance, two people with dyslexia might not need the same things to be able to thrive in a recruitment process, but also in the workplace as well. Training and monitoring and providing this to your staff, your employees. Support should continue beyond the recruitment process, and all employees should feel guided along the way. And awareness is really key. And training should be had with all employees. I really do believe that. And that's not those who are just neurotypical or just neurodivergent, but everybody. And providing kind of training and monitoring can help kind of be more formally informed once you're in role as well. Again, if you're hiring people, making sure onboarding instructions are clear, concise and specific. Avoid any kind of corporate jargon and acronyms. I remember when I first joined Penna and the acronyms, I thought it was another language. And once they're explained, they understand them. But avoiding that up front to be able to make sure people know what you are saying. Be sensitive to change. If things are changing, explain them, speak clearly and consistency, and avoid any room for kind of ambiguity in your instructions or your interactions. And where you can, just give really clear instructions right from the start about exactly how to carry out each task from start to finish. And something that I found really helpful with somebody I was working with previously was sometimes just asking the person to repeat back the instructions just to make sure that we were both on the same page before we went off and did our own different tasks. Providing reassurance and plans for changes in an office can be really, really important. And just asking about any sensory distractions, I think, is key as well. In particular, we touched on it earlier. Individuals, for example, with autism might be sensitive to things like temperature, sound, lighting. This can also sometimes be seen in those with anxiety as well. So provide what's needed, maybe place screens around desks if that will help. Provide noise cancelling headphones, have privacy areas, flexible working schedules, allocate corner desks and quiet rooms. Now, I totally understand not everything there is doable on a day-to-day basis, neurodiverse. But these are the kinds of things that I think can really help us with building these neurodiverse environments. It's kind of undeniable, I guess, that some traits that might be common to neurodivergent individuals can sometimes feel like they're challenging in a fast-paced corporate environment, but most of these challenges can be addressed by trained and supportive managers. And in fact, like, a lot of managers are now learning that many of the accommodations that we make for those who are neurodivergent actually can benefit neurotypical staff and employees as well. That whole giving clear expectations, giving explicit feedback, providing consistent communication, that's only going to make workplaces better for everybody. So many managers of neurodivergent professionals are reporting increased sensitivity to the individual needs of all employees by building awareness, and it's helped improve their ability to leverage the talents of everybody in the workplace. So, as you know, kind of today, we focused a lot on strengths, as I think it's so important that we do this. There is this power in difference, in particular in the workplace. And neurodiversity can be a competitive advantage when individuals are in the right environment, making use of their strengths instead of constantly attempting to or trying to overcome challenges. And to achieve this, we just must create inclusive spaces to work, to learn from one another, to listen and reduce those kind of disabling factors and amplify diverse abilities. I don't know if you've heard of the social model of disability. If you haven't, I'd recommend having a look at it. Now, it's not for everybody. I think it's one of those things that a lot of people believe in, some people don't. I'm a really big believer of it. So essentially what it is it focuses on the fact that often in times people are disabled by their surroundings and by the world around them, not enabling them to be at their best. So I think it's a really interesting way of looking at it, that people are more disabled by their surroundings than actually their own challenges or limitations. But recommend having a little read of it if you can. So we're nearly at the end and we'll have time for some questions, but I just wanted to leave you finally with the words of Greta Thunberg. Now, most of you will probably know who she is or recognize her, and I'm not going to go into all the details about her mission. That's not the point of today. But something I think that's really key is that she has been attacked online by many people in positions of power and people in the public eye, for the way she behaves, the way she conducts herself, acts, communicates, and basically pinning that down to her Asperger's. Now, she's spoken very publicly and openly, which is brilliant, about her Asperger's syndrome diagnosis after she was criticised over the condition, saying that it makes her different, but it's what she considers her superpower. So these words on here, I just love these. It's when haters go after your looks and differences, it means they have nowhere left to go. And then you know you're winning. I have Asperger's, and that means I'm sometimes a bit different from the norm. And given the right circumstances, being different is a superpower. And I just love that. And so we're at the end of the session. Thank you so much. I've put my obviously contact details on there, but I will hand over to Andrew if there's any questions at all.
Thanks, Alexis. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and insights. And yes, there've been lots of questions that have been coming through the Q&A and questions coming to us directly as well. And it's interesting, actually. It's a mixture of questions, sharing knowledge and debate in there as well. So if I go through some of the questions and share them with you, questions come through. It's interesting to know why some of these conditions affect males more than other genders. Not sure if there's any science behind this. Is there anything behind those stats?
Do you know what? I've looked into this so many times and I honestly can't find a definitive answer. There's a lot of kind of theories around the development of traditionally the different genders, and the fact that often boys will be taken to be diagnosed over girls or other genders, which might mean that they're diagnosed more, not that they have the condition more. But I other than that, it's a question I do get asked a lot, and I don't have a definitive answer to that. I do find it very interesting, and it's something that I will continue to find out as well. And if we ever do get an answer, I'll be sure to let people know.
Okay, thank you. Another question, which we've had a few variations of this actually, is around diagnosis. Anyone that is neurodivergent or close to neurodivergent knows how long that process can take, and there's a huge waiting list for adults to get that diagnosis. Yeah. So what can employers do to support somebody as they're going through that process? And are there any examples of what organizations or people have done to when this has happened?
Yeah, sure. So I was working with a client, and what I'll say first of all is probably very workplace specific to different people's environments, different company policies and whatnot. But I was working with a client recently, and actually because of the awareness raising that had been done, it was actually a manager who had identified a member of staff and said, you know what, I think it might be good if you go and get tested for these different things. And actually turned out he had autism, not been diagnosed his entire life, fully grown adult, and they had managed to have, they had a policy through work where they would be able to get people kind of gone through the testing process and to kind of be able to understand, and then from there they were able to make workplace adjustments. Now I think the thing is, I know that not every organization has that policy, but advice would be where you are in a position of influence or power to be able to look at what your policies are and actually how skilled your managers are in maybe identifying things. I think often sometimes when people are have lived and overcome things their entire lives, they find it very hard to be able to identify things that others might see. I was very recently myself, I'm 33 years old, diagnosed with bipolar, and there was a lot of things that I'd gone through in my day-to-day life that I just thought were normal. Obviously I am normal, whatever that means, but it was only took somebody else to kind of say to me, have you thought about this? And now my life couldn't be more balanced and better than it ever was. So sometimes it does take other people, but down to company policy, I guess it depends on what different companies will have in terms of support for that process.
Yeah, that's interesting. There have been a few questions around that. If you recognize traits, behaviors, and somebody you think might be neurodivergent, how do you broach that without being discriminatory within a workplace? Is there anything?
No, of course. I mean, I guess it's a case you can't say to somebody, I think you have this, but sometimes, and I'll give my own example, it was people highlighting things that that I would do or that I would maybe not do, and kind of asking about how I might think I can get over them. And when I didn't have the kind of answers to it, it made me kind of go away and look at, okay, maybe this is something I can look into. I think as well, it's very different for individuals and obviously different relationships with managers and things like that. But I also think that the more that we do around awareness raising, the more it enables people to not feel embarrassed or that they can't talk about these things openly in an office situation. Like, actually, why shouldn't we be able to kind of go, oh, by the way, for instance, I have bipolar and this is the way I prefer to work this way, and things like that. So it's a bigger conversation, certainly in terms of that wider acceptance piece and creating these environments where we don't think certain things are taboo to talk about. So it's a journey, I would say.
Okay, it's great to share, and somewhat ties in with another observation and question from somebody on the call, who says that the neurodiverse with autism, ADHD and dyspraxia have been diagnosed since childhood, and sometimes feel that they're disadvantaged when trying to move to the next stage of their career, as they struggle to socialize and fit in, using that fit question you mentioned earlier, despite working to high quality. How can they negotiate that?
So I think it kind of goes, I guess, back to also the environment that people are within. Like, and I say we as employers, as people who work in offices and companies, we should be creating these environments where people don't feel they need to fit in. And actually, it's absolutely fine for individuals to not want to socialize, and it shouldn't be kind of forced upon people. Now, in terms of what the individual can do, I would say it's probably more along the lines of continuing to be authentic to themselves, but also kind of flagging up where they're comfortable to do so around different ways that their manager or their employer can kind of support them. I think so often as well, again, going back to this, why we need to raise awareness is because people don't know how to broach subjects or to talk about things, but we should really be having, we're on a journey, of course, but workplaces where inclusion is the BAU, and actually people come to work and they are their authentic selves. And I always say I'm unapologetically Alexis at work, because Penna has this environment where I can just be myself, and that should be the same for everybody, that we don't feel like we have to fit in. But I feel like it is a balance between there's only so much an individual can do, but that's why if any of us on here are employers or managers or hiring managers, we can help support these environments where people don't feel they have to fit in.
Okay, that's great. It's great to share. The questions are still coming through, so please keep popping them through on the Q&A. There are a few questions around the interview process and the environment that have come through. And somebody's asked that, interview questions in advance is talked about a lot. Rather than wait for someone to ask, as they often won't, should we issue interview questions topics in advance to all candidates?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And what I would say is there's probably no one size fits all solution to that. I think we have to kind of be as supportive as we can for everybody, but also then if somebody does request something that's going to be kind of supportive to them, that we are able to make those adjustments as and when we need to. I think this is probably a bit of a different way of looking at it, but where we're saying people often won't ask, how are we creating environments where people feel comfortable to ask? I think that's the other way of looking at it. So you're absolutely right, whoever asked this, you do often find that I've seen it where people will get all the way to the end of a process and then say, oh, by the way, I don't know, I am dyslexia and I wish I'd asked for this. That 73% stat that I talked about of people not disclosing, I think the real challenge here is how do we make the environment so inclusive and comfortable that people do disclose up front, that they feel confident to do that. And there's a number of different ways I've been working with clients recently. There's ensuring that it's really, really evident and obvious in your upfront marketing materials, job descriptions, websites, that you are a disability positive employer, that you want people to disclose their disabilities, long-term health conditions, neurodivergent conditions, because it will only support them. Now, society obviously has an impact on people's desire to be able to disclose things, but we can make these situations as positive as possible. I've also seen a client recently, they have a dedicated person who is a singular point of contact for candidates throughout a process to be able to discuss any adjustments they might need. So they're always speaking to the same person when they contact the team. The person knows what they kind of disclose to them in a confident situation, in a safe situation, safe environment, and that they know they haven't got to explain their condition over and over and over again, and that they sometimes can speak to that person before they even make an application, so that they know that they're confident that by disclosing something, there won't be any judgment, there won't be any discrimination, and all those things. It sounds obvious, I guess, for those of us who might work in industry or in kind of professional environments, that of course we're not going to discriminate, but actually for somebody who might have actually experienced discrimination their whole life or something, through school, through college, through uni, or whatever in their social world, it can feel very hard. So yes, I think it's a very interesting one. Sorry, going back to the original question of should we provide things up front, I think it's completely down to different individual organizations, but I think the bigger question is how do we change it so that people don't fear telling us about them up front anyway.
Okay, great. And once again, leading on from that, a question about, is there specific training and what support should we give to hiring managers to ensure that they are comfortable recruiting within a neurodivergent workforce? Is there anything you could recommend?
So in terms of training, I mean, I would love to say sessions like this are brilliant, obviously. I would say that. But no, I think it's about it. I mean, training is great. I think one thing I would say is training, should be done in, I think, a number of different ways. I think so often, we've probably all been there, we've done a training session maybe online, or we've done a training session in person, and it's often somebody kind of talking to us and we're taking information in. But even just going back to the whole topic we've been talking about today, people take information in very different ways. For me, I find it really hard to sit and listen for an extended period of time and take things in. That's just me. The person who sits next to me at work might not. So it's how do we provide insight training in an ongoing basis, but in a number of different ways to people? How do we, again, create these environments where we're comfortable sharing our own experiences with each other and engaging in these conversations so that they do become BAU, and it doesn't have to be, oh, we're sat in a room now, let's talk about it. So I think that in terms of how we can train people, I think it's a case of there's a number of different courses out there. I think it's about really understanding what your managers or your employees need. So I would always say with anything that we propose to kind of clients that we're talking to is to, rather than jump to a solution, let's look at understanding the real problem. So maybe let's speak to people first, run some workshops, understand actually what people don't know, because I think we can often assume that everybody is at this same level of learning and let's all give everybody the same training or development areas. But really understanding what individual problems, and I say problem as a loose term, but let's use it, problems are, and then what the solutions in terms of training, upskilling, education, learning might be.
Great. Just looking at the time has absolutely flown by.
Yes,
we've still got a little bit more time left for a few more questions. So I'll ask you a few more, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And as we said, we'll get back to that. We get the chance to do that. There's a question that came through quite early, actually, which is just, I guess, your viewpoint and take on really. The question is just to reiterate, telling people that accommodations are available, as it's important to ask them what they need. How can they know what accommodations they need if they don't know what the environment is like, or what is possible in the roles? That's quite an interesting, observation, really.
That's a really great question. I think let's look at it in two ways. So again, that's a really good point, that sometimes when you ask people, what reasonable adjustments do you need? And even I think sometimes the term reasonable adjustments, I think we talk about it so often, but actually, does that mean anything to somebody who doesn't work in this industry? Probably not. So it's sometimes about really asking the questions about, okay, what support have you had previously when you went to school? Like, did you have any support through exams or learning? When you do hobbies outside of work and things like that, what support might you have? Or any previous employers, what did they do specifically that really supported you in terms of being able to perform at your best? And I think also making it really clear that that might change, and actually it's okay if you find that something's not working, to continue to ask and update your manager, your line manager, whoever it might be. I think in terms of what the environment's like, I've seen some people recently kind of do almost like workday trials as part of the actual recruitment process as well, for people to be able to get a feel for an environment as well, to understand. But going back to the points that I made about kind of consistency, clarity, almost in some cases over explaining, I think that will really help in terms of enabling people to maybe see what might support them. But the key thing being that once you say it once, you don't have to, then that's it forever and you can't change your mind. I've also seen as well a lot recently, people are calling them, I've forgotten the term, it's like passports basically. So as somebody's going through a recruitment process, they will kind of detail everything they might need. When they join, they might detail kind of things that might support them. If you're going to meetings, for instance, I prefer this, this and this, and it's available to kind of managers and senior staff, so that person doesn't have to explain every single time they go to a meeting or they go to this, I need this, or I prefer this kind of support. And it can be a really great tool to be able to kind of just have something so simple that outlines how you work best. So to work best with me, this is how I'd love to be worked with, and things like that. And again, they can be updated over time as well.
Brilliant. Time for one more question, I think. But it comes from Rosina. Hi, Alexis, really enjoyed the session. With all the research saying employers are nervous about recruiting neurodiverse candidates, is there a pool of success stories or case studies that we can tap into to share with recruiters and employers?
Yes, there are a number of ones that I've recently researched. I think what might be best there is if I can share them after the session to be able to kind of give a bit more insight rather than me waffle on for the final 3 minutes about different clients. But yes, there are a number of success stories as well around things that have worked well, but also things that haven't worked well. Sometimes a lot of this is trial and error. I did see though one thing, and this isn't a client of mine whatsoever, so I hope I've understood it correctly, but I did see something a few years back that EY were doing, and basically they were looking at hiring teams as teams rather than hiring individuals into teams, so they could get that mix of minds, that people who work well together in the hiring process. Now, I don't know a lot more than that, but again, if you want to do some research afterwards, it might be good to have a look into that. I thought it was quite interesting, quite innovative. Whether it worked or not might be a different thing, but just again, a really different way of looking at hiring to ensure that everybody is getting the best experience. Yes, of course, you're always hiring the best person for the job, that's a given, but just looking at slightly different ways that you can make sure everybody is supported in the process.
Brilliant, brilliant. So there are other questions. We'll get back to you, and please do keep sending any questions that you've got, or share any thoughts and feedback through the chat and the Q&A. And obviously, if you want to reach out directly to Alexis, she'll be more than happy to respond, or me or the organisation if we can help in any way. I want to say a massive thank you to Alexis for giving up the time and sharing her experience and insight. Really big thank you to everyone that's attended the call today. And if there's anything you want to finish off on, Alexis, before we finish the call.
No, just thank you so much. Reach out to me if you have questions, either the email address, which I'm sure will be popped in the email, or through LinkedIn. But just thank you so much for everybody joining. It was so amazing to see so many people wanting to learn more about this, and I hope everybody took away at least something. And as I said, do try and do some learnings on your own. We can never ever stop learning. But thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.